Hey, what would you do if you suddenly discovered that your child couldn't eat regular meals? That your child had an allergy and could actually be harmed by regular food? Well, I'll tell you what our next guest did. She became an allergy-free baker. Changed the way she made her food, changed the way she bought her food, and today we'll even demonstrate what she has done to change her way of life. My name is Vin Dacquino, and our next guest is Colette Martin. Ah, what a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, Vin. Thanks for
Colette,
having me.
what do we have here? And tell me a little bit about this change in your life.
Yeah, well, I decided you might be hungry, Vin, so we're going to make some chocolate chip cookies today. But instead of chocolate chip cookies that are made with wheat, butter, eggs, and milk, like most traditional baking recipes are, everything I make is made without the top food allergens. And the top food allergens are wheat, dairy, soy, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, and shellfish. Of course, we don't use the fish and shellfish much when we're baking.
Right. So you've changed your way of life, and you now get ingredients that you didn't use before.
That's right. That's right.
Now, are these things readily available, or?
A lot of them are, actually. It's a lot easier today to find some of the ingredients that we need to use to make safe foods than it was 12 years ago when my son was diagnosed with multiple food allergies. Certainly you can find them at most health food stores, but a lot of the grocery stores are now becoming more mainstream with some of these ingredients as well.
So, now, isn't it true you also have to become very label conscious?
Yes, labels are extremely important. Again, when my son was diagnosed 12 years ago, it was prior to the food allergen labeling laws coming into effect. And that made it really, really difficult for people because you really had to be a detective and a sleuth to figure out whether or not a particular food that you were buying off the shelf was safe for you or your child.
Now, when you say safe, you really mean safe. I mean, these things can actually harm your child?
I do mean safe. It really is all about keeping our kids safe. Food allergy symptoms really have a wide range, everything from skin rashes to gastrointestinal problems. Wow. But in the worst case scenarios, the person with the food allergy can go into anaphylactic shock. And what that really means is that the body is fighting against something that would normally be considered good, a food that most of us can eat, and decides that this is a foreign invader and it needs to attack itself. And your immune system goes into hyperdrive and everything starts to shut down.
Wow, so it's like a battle within your body.
It is. It's a battle within your body. And food allergies, I like to say, are a disability that you really can't see. You see a child who's in a wheelchair, you know they have a disability. You see a child that has a food allergy, they look just like everybody else. And so parents, caregivers, school teachers all have to be very, very diligent about making sure that our kids stay safe with the food that they eat.
So you basically had to educate yourself on how to cook and prepare food for your family.
Then the day my son was diagnosed with allergies to wheat, dairy, soy, eggs, and peanuts,
all the things
I went home, I looked in the cupboard, and I had no idea what I was going to make for dinner that night. Everything we had was something that wasn't safe for him. And so I really had to rethink how to cook and how to bake. And baking goods are especially difficult because they do tend to include those ingredients: wheat, milk, soy, eggs.
And you can't even cheat a little. I mean, you even have to wash pans out that may have been used with things that contained.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Even a tiny amount of a food allergen can be life-threatening for a person or child with food allergies. And so, yeah, it's really important that the pans you use, that the utensils you use, if you dip 1 spoon into milk and then dip it into the non-dairy milk that you're going to use, you've now contaminated that milk, and it's no longer safe for somebody to have.
And we've heard a great deal recently about peanut allergies, but it's not just peanuts.
It's not just peanuts, although peanut allergies are very prevalent. They do tend to be among some of the most severe in terms of anaphylactic reactions, but it is not just peanuts. And today, it's very common for every classroom to have at least 2 children that have food allergies.
Wow.
And they may be multiple food allergies, and different children with allergies to different foods that then need to be separated to make sure that they both can stay safe.
So you even have to be very careful. I know that some children, and I did it too, in school swap lunches, and he can't do that, can he?
He can't do that. He can't do that. And there are 1 out of every 13 children today is estimated to have a food allergy.
Wow.
So there are a lot of kids in our schools today that have this problem.
Wow. So you've redone your kitchen.
Redone the kitchen, threw out all the wheat, threw out all the dairy products, and now everything I bake is made without those food allergens.
So this affects the rest of the family as well. So now, how's that work?
Well, there was a little bit of resistance at first.
Yeah.
But everything I make, everything I serve to my family, I make it so that everybody at the table can eat it. That's not always possible for every family.
Sure.
Sometimes you have a child who can only have rice and another one who can only have corn. And in those extreme cases, those families have to be super, super diligent, feeding children at separate times. It really does create a lot of stress around mealtime.
Mm-hmm. And again, this could be life-threatening.
It can be life-threatening.
Wow.
It can be life-threatening. There are drugs that can stop an anaphylactic reaction. It's called epinephrine, and it's injected. You've probably heard of that. And so it's really, really important that anybody who has contact with somebody who has food allergies understands exactly what foods they can have, exactly what foods they can't have, and make sure that they follow the plans to keep that child safe.
So now this book isn't just a simple cookbook.
No.
You have some very special things in this book. Tell me a little bit about how you set this book up.
So I'm all about how-to, and my goal really with the book was to help other families. So I had done a lot of experimenting in my own kitchen, and it's difficult enough to bake without wheat or to bake without eggs, but when you bake without wheat, eggs, milk, and butter,
I don't know how you do it.
It becomes a whole other challenge. The challenge is compounded. It is a science, and baking really, truly is a science. And so over the past 12 years, as I've done these experiments in my kitchen and created my own recipes, I've come up with the formulas that I know work, and I really wanted to share that knowledge with other parents who have the same challenge of, what am I going to send to school in the lunchbox tomorrow? How am I going to feed my child breakfast? What am I going to make for dinner? And so the first part of the book is all about how-to. There's a chapter on how to replace wheat. There's a chapter on how to replace eggs. There's a chapter on how to use the non-dairy milk.
So about half of this book is how-to.
About the first third is how-to, yes.
Good, wow.
Yes.
And then another thing about this book that I absolutely love, the photographs. So that you can actually see what the product should look like in the end.
Yes.
That's good for me, because somehow what the things I make don't look like they're supposed to.
Well, it was really important to me, Vin, as you know, I did the photographs, all the photographs in the book myself.
Beautiful.
And it was really important to me that the food be photographed the way a home baker would actually be able to make it. I don't use any gimmicks in terms of the food photography. It's all real food, it's all natural food, and it's the way it really looks when it comes out of the oven.
Yeah. Well, it looks
should
like,
we make some
it
chocolate
looks
chip
like you're getting
cookies?
ready to show us some of these ingredients. Focus a little bit so we can see exactly what's going to go into these things.
Okay. So we're going to make chocolate chip cookies today, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the ingredients as we go. This is actually one of my favorite recipes to make. In the book, it starts as a sugar cookie recipe, but I happen to love chocolate, and so I come up with an excuse to put chocolate in and everything. Chocolate people can be allergic to chocolate. It's not one of the top food allergies.
Thank goodness.
But there are some things we need to worry about chocolate, which I'll talk about in a minute. But let's start with the flours. There are a whole host of gluten-free flours that are available. In this case, I'm going to start with buckwheat flour. And buckwheat, which is not wheat, it's not even closely related to wheat, is will really give sort of a little bit of a nutty taste to...
Can that be purchased in a regular grocery store?
You can find buckwheat flours in grocery stores. Sometimes they're hard to find, but you definitely can get it in health food stores. And you know, another great resource for finding some of these foods is online. A lot of them are available online, including Amazon. Next, I'm going to add a gluten-free flour blend, and this is an off-the-shelf gluten-free flour blend. In this particular case, I'm using King Arthur Flour gluten-free flour blend. It comes in a blue and white box. Now, one of the important things about flour is that gluten-free flours weigh considerably more than traditional wheat flours. And one of the biggest mistakes that bakers make is using too much flour when they're baking gluten-free. The weight of the flour is what's important here. And so while my recipe calls for 3/4 of a cup of gluten-free flour blend, in this case I'm actually using a little bit less than that. I'm using about 2/3 of a cup. And the reason for that is because this happens to be a particularly heavy flour. And so 9 times out of 10, when somebody says to me, I've been baking allergen-free or gluten-free, and they say it came out too dry, usually the problem is that they used too much flour.
Okay.
So we're just going to stir this together here. Then we're going to add in, I've mixed together the xanthan gum, the baking powder, and the salt. And you're looking at me funny, and that's probably because you want to know what xanthan gum is.
Yes, exactly.
Xanthan gum is a special ingredient that gluten-free bakers use, and it helps to hold, it's like a glue that helps to hold, to bind the baked goods together.
Is that what egg might have done?
No, not at all. Egg plays an entirely different role. In this case, it's really what the gluten in the wheat flour does.
Okay.
That's what the xanthan gum really helps us replace. Now I'm going to add just regular table sugar. Sugar is almost never a problem for people with food allergies.
Great.
Maybe problems for people with other illnesses, but not with food allergies. And you can substitute any kind of granulated sugar that you like. If you prefer brown sugar, if you prefer evaporated cane juice, all of that will work. And so now I've got my dry ingredients mixed together. And almost always when you're baking, you're going to put your dry ingredients together first, and then you're going to start adding your wet ingredients. The next thing I'm going to add is the shortening. And in this case, I've already cut it into tablespoon-sized pieces. And you want to use the shortening cold. Now, if you were making traditional cookies, this would most likely be butter that you would be using. But of course...
Almost looks like butter.
It almost looks like butter. This is a really, really high-quality shortening made by Earth Balance. It's called Earth Balance Natural Shortening. It's made with all non-genetically modified oils. And it works really, really well as a replacement for butter. And I'm going to go ahead and use my pastry cutter here to start cutting this into, and just so you can see what I'm doing, I'm just working the shortening into the flour. Now, shortening, you always want to use it cold, so you keep it refrigerated until you're ready to start making your cookies.
And again, all of your utensils have to be absolutely sterilized, just about clean, to make sure they were not used with anything.
That's a good point. Something like this pastry cutter, it's really easy for small particles to hide in there. So if you use that pastry cutter yesterday to make your wheat cookies, you've got to really make sure that it's been sanitized. The best way to do that is to run it through the dishwasher to get that ready. So you can start to see that it's getting a little bit crumbly, but we really want this to be very crumbly before we start adding in the rest of our wet ingredients. Now, one of the really cool things about this particular recipe is what we're going to end up with is a roll of cookies that we can place in the refrigerator. It can stay there for many, many weeks, or it could even be frozen. And so then, you know, just like those Toll House cookies that you
that you do,
that we used to get at the grocery store, and that you could slice up and pop in the oven for an after-school snack. You can make your own cookie rolls, have them waiting in the refrigerator, have them ready for when you need just a handful of cookies, or you can make lots and lots of rolls and have them available for a big party, or when your son comes home and says, gee, Mom, you need something for school tomorrow. So you can see it's starting to get a little bit crumbly here.
Yeah, it is.
And so now I'm ready to add in the wet ingredients. Now, Vin, you asked about eggs.
Right.
What I'm using as an egg replacer here is actually applesauce.
Wow.
I like to use natural unsweetened applesauce, and in this recipe we're just using 2 tablespoons. And I'm going to go ahead and start to work that in. There are a number of different possibilities for replacing eggs. Applesauce works really wonderfully for things like cakes, muffins, and cookies. And there are other options that work really well. In this case, the applesauce will not provide any leavening. So if I were wanting to make like a sandwich bread, I would make sure that I used more leavening, either with the baking powder or, of course, with the yeast. Now I'm going to add in 1 tablespoon of cold water, and you can actually add in as much water as you need to until the dough is formed. And so you can see that it's starting to come together there. It's starting to look something like a dough.
Yeah.
And how you know when this is ready to start rolling into logs that we're going to put in our refrigerator or freezer is you can start to see it actually sheet off of the pastry cutter. I actually have sheets of dough forming. So now I know that we're ready to start creating
a roll.
Oh, but we can't forget our chocolate chips.
Oh, man.
Now, in this case, I'm using chocolate chips from a company called Enjoy Life. And the reason I use these particular chocolate chips, these are actually mini chocolate chips. They also make a chocolate chunk. The reason I'm using these particular chocolate chips is because they were made in a dedicated facility that doesn't include...
Because you have to be very careful that they haven't used like peanut oil or something that...
That's exactly right.
Wow.
Now, chocolate itself is essentially allergen-free, although there are people who do have some issues with chocolate. Chocolate doesn't naturally contain dairy. When you hear the term cocoa butter, that's actually the fat component of chocolate. It's not actual butter.
Oh, wow.
There is no butter or milk in there whatsoever. But what happens is, because so much of the chocolate we consume is milk chocolate, a lot of the,
and it has really milk added.
Milk is actually added to milk chocolate. I'm going to break this into 2 pieces, and we're actually going to create 2 rolls.
And
Just
this
like
can
that.
be frozen for a later date.
This can be frozen for a later date. If you want to make the cookies right away, you should really refrigerate them for at least an hour before cutting them.
Was there a reason
and we're
for
just
that?
gonna, just so that it all kind of solidifies, and
it's easier to
you
deal
want
with.
it to be chilled. I've been working with the ingredients, and so they'll bake best when they're chilled. If you're in a real hurry, you could probably get away with not doing it. And so we've got 1 cookie roll here, and I've got another one in there, ready to roll when we have time to do that. But now we're going to go ahead and get our cookies ready to go into the oven. Now, again, we talked about contamination. I like to use parchment paper on my baking sheet.
Okay.
And again, one of the reasons for that is to avoid contamination. If you have a cookie sheet where you're only using it to make your allergen-free cookies, it's not necessary to use the parchment paper, but this way just gives you an extra layer of protection against possible contamination. So this is a roll that I had in the refrigerator last night, and you can see it just feels a little bit harder than the last one did. And we're just going to go and slice these up the same way you would slice up those Toll House cookies.
Look at that.
Now, these cookies will pretty much hold their form while they're being baked, which makes this actually a really good recipe to use with cookie cutters if you're making Christmas cookies or cookies for any festive occasion. They will hold their shape as you're baking. They'll just expand a little bit. And in this case, as we're making the cookies, but also with any pastry dough that's gluten-free, if it falls apart, you don't need to start all over. You just smush it back together with your fingers, and we're not going to worry about
now the parchment paper you can put in the oven too when you...
Parchment paper can go into the oven. Wax paper cannot.
Oh, okay.
So parchment paper is actually made for this very purpose, for making pastries and putting them into the oven. And you know, another advantage of having a recipe that's made without eggs is you don't have to worry about eating the cookie dough. You can eat it. You can eat it raw.
That's right. No raw eggs.
It can stay in the refrigerator for weeks. You can slice off. If you want just 5 cookies for your daughter when she comes home from school, there you go. So once we've got these all together, where we will have already preheated our oven by now to 350 degrees, and we'll be putting the cookies into the oven for just about 12 minutes.
Wow.
And you'll see a little bit of browning on the top. The bottoms will be slightly browned. And this is how we make chocolate chip cookies.
Great.
There we go.
So then they pop them in the oven.
We pop them into the oven. And by magic.
Oh, man. Now I get to try one of these, right?
Yes, you do.
Uh-oh. Here we go. Delicious.
Tastes just like regular
Like a
chocolate
regular
chip cookies, don't
cookie.
they?
Maybe a little better, actually.
That's the goal. That's the goal. And that's the goal with
Wow.
all of my recipes, is to have food where the person who's eating it doesn't say, oh, that's dairy-free, or oh, that's gluten-free, or oh, that's vegan, which, by the way, by definition, everything in this book is, nearly everything in the book is also vegan because it doesn't include dairy or eggs.
Wow. Well, this is absolutely wonderful. So, chocolate chip cookies, give me an idea of some of the other things that you make.
So again, I'm a baker. I'm an allergen-free baker. One of my favorites is muffins. I love to make muffins because muffins are easy to take with you wherever you go. One of the things people with food allergies need to be concerned about is what to do when they're on the road. It's easy to stick a muffin in a purse, in a handbag, in a lunchbox, on a carry-on plane.
Yeah, what about vacations?
Vacations, yes.
Hard.
Whenever I go anywhere, whenever I travel, because I personally am also allergic to gluten and soy.
Oh, no kidding. Wow.
I always take snacks with me, just in case. But eating out at restaurants is an issue. There are applications, mobile applications that are available today to help people find restaurants that cater to families with food allergies. There are some areas of the country that are better at handling that than others. Massachusetts passed a law that really requires that their staff be trained on food allergies so that they really understand it. But for the rest of us who live in other parts of the country, it's a little bit hit or miss. And whether or not you have a chef and a wait person or staff member who understands that when you say you're allergic to milk, that also means you're allergic to butter, and that you shouldn't be slathering the butter all over the steak. Something to remember for anybody with a dairy allergy is to always tell the server that you're also allergic to butter and cream, because they sometimes get that confused. And so it's a little bit hit or miss, but so it's really on the parents or the person with the food allergies to communicate really, really well with the staff and make sure they understand what they can have and what they can't have, and even to ask them to see the labels on the food that they're using if they need to.
What about schools? What does your son do at school?
Schools, well, my son now is older and he's out in the workforce.
Oh, well, that's good.
But schools have some difficulty with this. You may have heard in the news lots and lots of issues over the last few years about
Especially peanut issues.
Kids that have food allergies, kids that had an allergic reaction at school, even unfortunately kids who have died from allergic reactions that they've had at school.
Yeah.
We've also heard stories about schools that have attempted to implement, for example, a peanut-free policy. No peanuts, which also means no peanut butter, allowed in the school. And other parents who don't have food allergic children up in arms, saying that that is a violation of their own rights to send the peanut butter sandwich to school. And so there's a lot of controversy there, and I really think it's all about open communication and making sure that everybody's doing their part to keep their kids safe.
Now, tell me, where can we get this book?
That book is available. It's available on Amazon. It's available at Barnes & Noble. It's available everywhere books are sold.
Wonderful.
Yes,
Wonderful.
it's available in both print and ebook format.
And you recommend this even for people who have children who don't have allergies. It's a healthy way of eating, isn't it?
Well, you know, again, approximately 2 kids in every classroom will have a food allergy today. That's a huge rise from 10 years ago. Food allergies have risen 18% in children over the past decade. So that means that when you're sending those cupcakes to school, there's a child in that room who can't eat them.
Can't eat that, right?
Or your child or your grandchild may have a classmate who has food allergies, and they may want to invite them over for a sleepover. So there are a lot of reasons why this is important. The other reason it's important is this is one of the few books out there that really focuses on eliminating the top allergens and all of the top allergens. And so if you have one family member that's gluten-free, another one that's vegan, another one that's allergic to milk.
You need to educate yourself.
You need a combination of things. That's
right.
right.
We are unfortunately right at the end of our time. I could not thank you enough for being here. I hope these parents out there are listening, and teachers and chefs. Very important. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you, Vin.
And thank you for being here on the show. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you continue to tune in. Thank you for being with us. My name's Vin Dacquino, and you are on Let's Talk Writing.